Welcome everybody to the first ED Grand Round 2012. I don't know if you can hear me clearly. Kick things off. Donald Bradigan will be presenting on social media. What's there in emergency medicine? A Luddiot's guide. I hope Luddiot. Donald Bradigan is one of our senior registrars at the Royal Hobart. Donald has completed his fellowship exam, and it's just in his last few weeks of general medicine before completing. Donald, take it away.
Alrighty, welcome guys. My name's Donald. I'd just like to welcome you all to the first ED Grand Round of 2012. And it's also my first ED Grand Round as well, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm not allowed to apologise for that because Terry's sitting right in front of me. So the title of this talk, which was born out of some discussion about what the hell we were going to talk about, is Social Media and Web 2.0 in Emergency Medicine. And as Joe said, it's the Luddiot's Guide. So, as you can probably guess, a combination of Luddite and idiot. Joe and I had a bit of debate as to what the scope of the talk would be and what the title would be. His title was slightly more offensive. He wanted to call it the Illiterate Guide, with IT in there. Can you see the small print on that elsewhere, guys? I just want to make sure that it's all legible. Can anyone comment? Hello? No. All right. Joe's title was slightly more offensive, so I stuck with my own, the Luddiot's Guide. And I'm hoping you can read all the small print on some of these, because these are basically screen grabs from the internet. And a bit of a Twitter discussion that I had about this very talk. Before I start, I just want to say there's not going to be any randomized controlled trials, no literature reviews, no case presentations. I'll present no evidence, no forest plots, basically no data of any kind. This is primarily an opinion piece, and I confess to being massively biased. Despite my Luddite beginnings, I am not most fanatical of zealots, the recent convert. So, anyone know who this is?
Bonnie Prince Charlie.
He looks a bit like that, doesn't he? It's the eponymous Ned Ludd, who, from what I can gather, was essentially a thug driven by opposition to the Industrial Revolution and, I don't know, loss of jobs, things like that.
They're called unionists, okay?
Yeah, well, can you stop stealing my jokes, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. He was an early version of a union heavy with a little anarchy thrown in. He wasn't the cleverest by all accounts either. It might be worth saying that he might have done okay in Tasmanian politics. So this is a poem that was written posthumously about him. They said Ned Ludd was an idiot boy, that all he could do was wreck and destroy, and he turned to his workmates and said, "Death to machines, they tread on our future and they stamp on our dreams." I'd just like to put forward the motion that social media doubters are trying to wreck and destroy the greatest opportunity in modern medical education. So in terms of who I am and why I've ended up talking about this, as Joe said, I'm nearly finished my training. I just passed my exam, and I'm currently doing penance for 3 months in general medicine, which I foolishly put off to the end of my training. But the whole point of this is that I'm specifically not an expert in technology, as you can see from the hardware problems beforehand. I was the last person in my medical school class to get a mobile phone, and that's my excuse for missing out on most of the social opportunities. I'd get home and check my hardwired messages and find out that everyone else was in the pub. It was too late for me. I've got absolutely no programming skills. My father was a language teacher who abhors the destruction of language of my generation. He'd be horrified by the more recent generations, and if he knew of the existence of terms like "see you later," he'd be absolutely horrified. So we shelter him from that. The point being, I'm not a geek, I'm not techie in any way. I have absolutely no idea about the hardware, and I fully expect that it'll let me down at least one more time through this whole procedure, so please bear with me if that happens. I'm not talking about, I'm a user of it. I've absolutely no idea about the software program. I'm really completely green when it comes to hardware. So I'm up here basically because I have probably been noted to be a bit of a zealot about this stuff during the last sort of 6 months to a year, when I essentially largely used Web 2.0 resources and social media for the entirety of my FACE and fellowship exam. Everyone would recommend that you need to read textbooks cover to cover. You should read at least one, you should read several, all sorts of stuff. Personally, based on my own experience, I don't think that's necessarily the case. It may work for some people, but I found it so deeply tedious that I couldn't do it. So I needed to be much more interactive in my learning. and so I use social media a lot. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure I'd have passed the exam first time around if it hadn't been for social media. So I pester everyone here with this stuff ad infinitum. I send emails around everybody with recent papers that I've discovered and links and share. I don't know whether anyone looks at them, but I certainly pester people with them. So I think the Grand Round is their revenge, and shares the pain with the whole state. And I think it's made me a better medical practitioner as well. But if you know any different, please be quiet. So what to expect from the next 45 minutes? I'll outline how I believe that social media opens up a world of educational opportunity. We're verging on negligent for not using it and contributing to it. And I'm pretty excited about the vista this stuff opens up, and I want to share it. I think you should all get involved. Before we launch into the talk proper, it's a little bit of scene setting. Does anyone know what this is? It's the Book of Kells. Fantastic. So this lives in my old university in Trinity College in Dublin, and it's an illuminated manuscript from early Christian times. And it takes us way back in time to a simpler age when men were men and brandished swords and raped and pillaged, or carved in stone towers decorating bits of parchment and vellum, and trying to avoid being pillaged. But basically the history of media is one of change and resistance to change. And I believe that all media are just tools. People say social media is a bad thing. I think that's rubbish. I think it's just a tool, and it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Illuminated manuscripts weren't good. And they're certainly beautiful, but they're visible and accessible only to the educated and religious elite. They were not in on of themselves a good thing, and they were shared with only a few people. But printing changed all that. Initially, printing was considered vulgar and only for the poor. Aristocratic bibliophiles refused to disgrace their collections with the presence of non-manuscript text. It fell to the lower classes to recognize the importance of the printing press. By the end of the 15th century, there's some big numbers. I'm not going to read them all. But the introduction of print led to similar debates as those raging today about social media, and the same sorts of discussions have revolved around almost every technological advance in communication. Now, we were sharing with a few more with print, but not everyone was happy with that. There was much debate about the merits of enlightening the poor. I would argue that we are debating the wrong thing. We shouldn't be debating whether these technologies are good or bad, but embracing them as tools and learning to use them to do good things rather than bad things. In many ways, the history of communication is one that reflects democratic socialism, but that's a whole nother discussion. We've covered religion and politics, which are of course never controversial, especially where I come from, in Northern Ireland. I'd like to move on to the shadowy, carpeted world of administration. There are one or two people in here who might know a little bit more about that than me. But unfortunately, not everyone agrees that the increasing accessibility of information is essentially a benefit. This is the snapshot screen grab from the new Royal Hobart Hospital policy on the topic, which isn't the worst actually. It's not too bad, but it certainly leaves the door open to interesting responses to the use of social media. There are some progressive social media policies from elsewhere, particularly the US, that recognise the benefits, but many simply reflect the conservative establishment view that social media is essentially a waste of time. For example, in our own department, internet some time ago was blocked at the end of bed computers. It was meant to stop Facebook use, but it also stops the use of educational resources for nursing staff who feel that the flight deck where the medical staff operate is outside the area they're allowed to be in, and so they are not at all really encouraged to look up the internet, find out about the patients they're looking after. And I know for a fact that several people are somewhat upset about that. And there's also an element of elitism. The doctors are allowed to use the internet and the nurses aren't, and all this kind of stuff. So it's I think a backward step. It's akin to saying because some people look at pornography or read tabloid newspapers that we're not going to let anyone read. I think it's ridiculous, personally. So this is the threat buried at the end of our policy. Any breach of the guidelines will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, depending on the severity of the breach. If an employee is spending excessive periods of time on social media sites, etc., etc. If the employee is writing derogatory comments about the agency, yada, yada, yada. All this stuff is standard. You can't criticize your employer, all that kind of stuff. That's all standard. But what's interesting is that if all of this was applied to me, I should probably be fired. Once again, for the purposes of this talk, please don't agree. So the point of this talk is I believe managers are scared of social media. They see only the abuse and not the usefulness. And my aims in this talk are to encourage you to explore Web 2.0 resources, social media, and use it constructively. I'd like to suggest some resources worth using and demonstrate their utility. There are probably people here who know a lot more about this than me, and there are certainly people in the north of the state, and one person in particular in Alston who contributes quite a lot to this. But my goal is also to try and expand the community and ultimately improve education and patient care. And yeah, that's about it. Possibly boost my own website traffic. So this is a little graphic demonstrating the kind of progression in the primary resources used by doctors. And it's borrowed from a talk by Mike Cadogan, and it illustrates a sort of generational change. And I suspect most of us here are somewhere in the middle of this. But on the left is Trevor Jackson, who some of you might know, who's a face him over in WA. But he doesn't actually wear a white coat, and he doesn't look over the rim of his glasses like that. And I've never seen him with Harrison's in his hand, but he's doing a bit of acting here. The guy in the middle is probably, don't know who he is, but he probably represents most of us. We're starting to get comfortable with smartphones and computers. And the guy on the right presumably is the future, using a pad and whatever else is beyond. And I guess that's what that's meant to represent. And with this generational change in mind, I actually wrote a blog post which was a certain amount of stirring in it and a certain amount of devil's advocacy. But after my studying for the fellowship, I wrote a blog post on the imminent demise of the textbook for anything other than a doorstop, or perhaps bookshelf dressing, so that people who come to visit her, non-medical, are impressed with your obvious intelligence. And this post led to a bit of an international Twitter discussion until it was finally agreed that the textbook is not dead, it's actually on ECMO. So as far as I can gather, that compromise was really reached because Mike Cadogan, who was part of this conversation, was still in the process of writing 2 more textbooks. He's finally decided, getting frustrated with how long publishing takes, to publish them as iBooks himself. So